Hey guys, it's Miss Felicia and welcome to our History Classes Homework Podcast. As we discussed in class today, you're going to be writing your first historical research paper. Now I know how that sounds, but remember, history is any aspect from our past, something we can learn from and find interesting. So your topic can be about anything as long as it's appropriate. I want you guys to be as interested and excited as you can be about writing this paper. And my main goal is that you guys have a firm grasp on what primary and secondary sources are and how to use them. This podcast is a refresher on what we learned about them today in class. So let's refresh. Your paper needs to be 3 to 5 pages long and structured how we discussed it should be in class today. It needs to reference at least one primary source and 2 credible secondary sources with a works cited page. My only restriction on your secondary sources is that it cannot be Wikipedia and should be credible. And while I'm specifically talking about Wikipedia, we will learn more about credible sources, secondary sources, this week and what is acceptable. Remember, your paper can be about anything as long as it has an appropriate topic that you can research and write about. I want you guys to either prove a point or give me an in-depth understanding of your topic. Remember, this is about you guys getting to understand primary and secondary sources. If you remember from class, I spoke about how I wrote my college thesis paper on Frankenstein. That's right, Frankenstein. A book written by Mary Shelley about the Dr. Frankenstein and his monster creation. My paper explored the influences surrounding the author when she wrote the book, and pointed out what may have influenced her story of the monster. I wanted to prove it was more than just her acclaimed imagination. With that said, I will discuss what a primary and secondary source is by using examples from my paper, and the things we discussed today in class about them. Now pay attention as we will have a flash quiz at the end. Bring your answers in tomorrow, and for every correct answer, you will receive half a bonus point on your paper. Now, let's quickly review what we learned today about primary and secondary sources. Primary sources are original materials on which research is based on. Original materials can be things like poems, diaries, court records, interviews, surveys, newspaper articles, and the list goes on. I gave you guys a pretty long one today in class. Secondary sources are those that describe or analyze primary sources. They can be things like reference materials such as dictionaries, encyclopedias, and textbooks, but also books and articles written by credible authors that interpret and review these original works. Now that in a nutshell is what we discussed today, but how did I use that in my Frankenstein research paper? Well, the primary source I'm going to discuss is Mary Shelley's journal entry from the 16th of June, 1816. That's the night that she dreamt of her Frankenstein monster after discussing with her friends how they could all create a horror story to frighten each other. This is a direct quote from her diary. "When I placed my head upon the pillow, I did not sleep, nor could I be said to think. My imagination, unbidden, possessed and guided me, gifting the successive images that arose in my mind with a vividness far beyond the usual bounds of reverie. I busied myself to think of a story to rival those which had excited us to this task, one which would speak to the mysterious fears of our nature and awaking thrilling horror, one to make the reader dread to look round, to curdle the blood, and quicken the beating of the heart." End of diary entry. Now that is a perfect example of a primary source, and one that I used in my paper. The secondary source I'm going to talk about is a book called In Search of Frankenstein, The Myths Behind Mary Shelley's Monster by Radu Florescu. In his book, Radu explores Mary Shelley's trip in the summer of 1816 down the River Rhine and speculates the things she learned and saw that undoubtedly influenced her creative mind to create her story about the Frankenstein monster. And now that is an example of a secondary source that I used in my research paper. And that, guys, is a good refresher on primary and secondary sources and some examples I hope that will help you guys connect the meaning of what they are and examples of them. Now it's flash quiz time. There's going to be 5 questions, so please write down your answers and bring them to class tomorrow. Remember, each correct answer will give you half of a bonus point on your paper. The first question is, what primary source did I discuss for my Frankenstein paper? A. Mary Shelley's diary entry. B. A book about Mary Shelley. C. A photo of Mary Shelley. Or D. the book Frankenstein. Question 2. What type of secondary source did I discuss for my Frankenstein paper? A, the book Frankenstein. B, a book written about the Frankenstein monster and its creation by a historian. C, a story about the night Mary Shelley created the Frankenstein monster. Or D, Mary Shelley's diary. Question 3. Which of the following are examples of a primary source? Hint, there is more than one correct answer. A, a diary. B, a photo. C, an encyclopedia. Or D, a newspaper article. Question 4. Question 4 is a write-in, so get ready. What secondary source can you not use in your paper that I specifically mentioned in this podcast? What secondary source can you not use in your paper that I specifically mentioned in this podcast? Go ahead and write your answer in now. Question 5. What are 2 to 3 topics you are considering for your paper? You can fill this out later as you'll need some time to think, and we will discuss together what best option is fit for your paper. What are 2 to 3 topics you're considering for your paper? Take some time to think about it, guys. All right, that's the end of our quiz and podcast. Now you should have a better understanding of what primary and secondary sources are as we've refreshed what we learned in class and I've given you some examples from my own work. We will go over the questions tomorrow in class and review your potential topics. Then we're going to learn how to cite those sources in our paper, and that's what tomorrow night's podcast is going to be about. If you guys still have questions about primary and secondary sources, make sure you write them down and we'll go over them tomorrow. And there's a link below that goes to a YouTube video describing primary and secondary sources that might help you better understand. Look forward to seeing you guys in class tomorrow. Have a great night and happy thinking.